Days before the budget 2023 was presented before the Parliament, the economic survey was presented before the Parliament. One of the most important parts of the survey for 2023 was prices and inflation. Successful tightrope walking. Before we go any further, I would like you to like and share this video. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel and press the notification bell. Consumer price inflation in India went through three phases in 2022. A rising phase up to April 2022 when it crested at 7.8%, then a holding pattern at around 7% up to August 2022, and then a decline to around 5.7% by December 2022. The rising phase was largely due to the fallout of Russia-Ukraine war and a shortfall in crop harvests due to excessive heat in some parts of the country. The divergence between a relatively high wholesale price index inflation and lower consumer price index inflation widened in May 2022, primarily owing to a difference in relative weights of the two indices and the lagged effect of imported input costs on retail prices. However, the gap between the two measures of inflation has reduced since then, demonstrating a tendency towards convergence. RBI's Monetary Policy Committee increased the policy repo rate under the Liquidity Adjustment Facility by 225 basis points from 4% to 6.25% between May and December 2022. Central government has undertaken fiscal measures like reduction in excise duty on petrol and diesel, prohibition of export of wheat products, imposition of export duty on rice, reduction in import duties and cess on pulses, rationalization of tariffs and imposition of stock limits on edible oils and oilseeds, maintenance of buffer stock for onion and pulses, and rationalization of import duties on raw materials used in the manufactured products. Inflation in the country. In recent years, India's inflation rate has been well behaved, lying tamely below the RBI's target rate of 4% from 2017 to 2019. In 2020, supply-side disruptions pushed inflation beyond the RBI's upper tolerance limit of 6%. As the pandemic receded, the conflict in Russia-Ukraine broke out, bringing in its wake worldwide inflation, fueled mostly by surging prices of crude oil and other commodities. India's inflation rate peaked in April 2022 at 7.8% before moderating at 5.7% in December 2022 on the back of good monsoons as well as prompt government measures that ensured adequate food supply. Global economic shutdown and interest rate increases brought down commodity prices, contributing to a substantial decline in wholesale price inflation. Core inflation remains sticky at nearly 6% and reflects the second-round effects of the supply shocks witnessed earlier this year. Further, with the recovery of demand, there has been a pickup in service inflation. Domestic retail inflation. Headline inflation declined from its peak. Financial year 2022 witnessed lower CPI combined base retail inflation as compared to financial year 21. Inflation remained on the higher side when compared to the moderation seen during the years prior to the pandemic. In financial year 23, retail inflation was mainly driven by higher food inflation, while core inflation stayed at a moderate level. Food inflation ranged between 4.2% to 8.6% between April and December 2022, while the core inflation rate stayed at around 6% except in April 2022. Retail inflation driven by food commodities. Retail price inflation mainly stems from the agriculture and allied sector, housing, textiles, and pharmaceutical sectors. During financial year 23, food and beverages, clothing and footwear, and fuel and light were the major contributors to headline inflation, the first two contributing more this fiscal than the previous one. Within the miscellaneous group, high inflation was observed in subgroups, household goods and services, and personal care and effects owing to the revival of consumer demand in post-COVID-19 period. Moreover, retail inflation in the health subgroup moderated in the current financial year as compared to financial year 2022. However, inflation in the education subgroup surged on account of schools reopening for in-person classes after the pandemic. Food inflation caused by vegetables and cereals in financial year 23. Food inflation based on Consumer Food Price Index climbed to 7% in financial year 23 from 3.8% in financial year 22. Though the increase in food inflation is broad-based, the major contributors are vegetables, cereals, milk, and spices. The RBI forecasts elevated domestic prices for cereals and spices in the near term owing to supply shortages. Milk prices are also expected to spike, reflecting high feed costs. To check the soaring prices of wheat and rice, the government has prohibited the exports of wheat products under HS Code 1101 and imposed an export duty on rice. Further, in order to insulate vulnerable sections from the rise in prices, the government has launched a new integrated food security scheme, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, on 1st January 2023 to provide free food grains to more than 80 crore beneficiaries. Measures to contain inflation in essential food commodities. Cereals. From 12th July 2022, wheat flour exports were permitted but were subjected to restrictions as recommended by an interministerial panel. With effect from 14th August 2022, the exports of maida and suji was allowed only after the approval of the interministerial panel. Central government, with effect from 9 September 2022, imposed an export duty of 20% on rice, brown rice and semi-milled as well as wholly milled rice except parboiled rice. Pulses. Buffer stock of pulses has been maintained for price stabilization in 2020-21, 21-22 and 22-23. Calibrated release of pulses from the buffer stock will moderate the prices in the market. Import duty on masoor was brought down to 0% with effect from 26 July 2021. On 30th March 2022, the import of tur and urad under the free category was extended until 31st March 2023. Central government on 1st September 2022 decided to provide 1.5 million tons of chana to states and union territories at a discounted rate for distribution under various welfare schemes. Edible oils. Central government on 24th May 2022 exempted custom duty and AIDC on yearly import of 20 lakh metric ton each of crude soya bean and sunflower oil for the years 2022 to 23 and 23 to 24. Basic duty on refined palm oil was reduced from 17.5% to 12.5% with effect from 21st December 2021 until 31st March 2022, and the basic duty on crude palm oil was reduced from 7.5% to 5% with effect from 13 February 2022 until 30th September 2022. Central government has allowed free import of refined palm oil until 31st December 2022. Central government in November 2021 cut the basic duty on crude palm oil, crude soya bean oil and crude sunflower oil from 2.5% to nil. The agri cess on these oils has been brought down to 5%. Rural-urban inflation differential has declined. Rural fuel inflation remains lower than its urban counterpart throughout the current fiscal, due to subdued price pressures on traditional fuel items such as firewood and cow dung cakes as opposed to petrol and diesel. While the current fiscal year saw rural and urban inflation closely tracking each other, financial year 22 had seen a wider differential between the two. The gap between rural and urban inflation reached its widest in March 2022 due to a difference in the experience of food inflation. Urban areas experienced a sharper increase in food prices of vegetables and oils during this time as compared to the hinterlands. Domestic wholesale price inflation. Wholesale price inflation caused by global supply chain disruption. WPI-based inflation remained low during the COVID-19 period, and it started to gain momentum in the post-pandemic period as economic activities resumed. The Russia-Ukraine conflict further exacerbated the burden as it worsened global supply chains along with the free movement of essential commodities. As a result, the wholesale inflation rate climbed to about 13% in financial year 22. Prices of items like petroleum products, basic metals, chemical products, and edible oils with maximum exposure to international pricing translated into a rise in the domestic WPI inflation. Measures to contain inflation in input prices. Fuel prices. The central government has made interventions by calibrating the excise duties on petrol and diesel. The first phase of reduction in terms of Rs 5 on petrol and 10 on diesel was made effective from 4th November 2021 and the second phase from 22nd May 2022. Plastic products. The import duty on raw materials used in the plastic industry have been reduced to lower the cost of domestic manufacturing. The duties on naphtha, propylene oxide and polymers of vinyl chloride have been reduced from 2.5% to 1%, 5% to 2.5% and from 10% to 7.5% respectively on 21st May 2022. Steel. On 21st May 2022, import duty on major inputs, ferronickel, coking coal, PCI coal has been cut from 2.5% to 0, while the duty on coke and semi-coke has been slashed from 5% to 0. Tax on exports of iron ores and concentrates has increased from 30% to 50%, while that on iron pellets has been raised to 45%. Cotton. Government waived custom duty on cotton imports with effect from 14 April 2022 until 30th September 2022 to benefit the textile industry and lower prices for consumers. The Central Boards of Indirect Taxes and Customs notified the exemption from custom duty and AIDC for import of cotton. Diamonds and gemstones. In Budget 2022-23, customs duty on cut and polished diamonds and gemstones was reduced to 5% and duty on simply sewn diamonds was reduced to nil. Chemical products. Customs duty on certain critical chemicals, namely methanol, acetic acid and heavy feedstock for petroleum refining was reduced in Budget 2022-23. Fuel price inflation, declining global crude oil prices. In financial year 22 and financial year 23, inflation in WPI, fuel and power was mostly driven by high international crude oil prices. In response to subdued global demand because of COVID-19 induced restrictions, the price of Indian basket of crude oil during financial year 21 stayed in the range of $20 to $65 per barrel. Therefore, prices started surging on account of unprecedented cuts in crude oil supply by Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and other oil-producing countries. The upward trend continued in financial year 22 and financial year 23 as demand picked up with the easing of COVID-19 restrictions in most regions of the world. Also, owing to supply disruption amid rising tensions in the Eastern Europe and the Middle East, in June 2022, the Indian basket of crude oil peaked at $116 per barrel. Subsequently, the price declined to $78 per barrel in December 2022. Further, a cut in central excise duty on petrol and diesel in November 2021 and May 2022, followed by a reduction in value-added tax by the state governments, led to a moderation of the retail selling price of petrol and diesel in India. Monetary policy measures for price stability. Reserve Bank of India's Monetary Policy Committee increased the policy repo rate under the Liquidity Adjustment Facility by 2.25% from 4% to 6.25% between May and December 2022. This does not include a further increase of the policy rate by another 25 basis to 6.5% now in the MPC of 8 February 2023, that is a few days after the economic survey. Housing prices, recovering housing sector after the pandemic. Housing prices provide helpful information on the state of the economy via booms and busts in asset markets, which gives rise to economic imbalances. Monitoring housing prices is essential for achieving the objectives of price stability, financial stability, and growth. The annual variation in HPI market price ranged from an increase of 37.7% in Bhubaneswar to a contraction of 6.5% in Indore in the quarter ending September 2022 over quarter ending September 2021. Out of 50 cities, 43 saw an increase in the index, whereas 7 cities showed a decline annually. All of the 8 major metros of the country, Ahmedabad, Bengaluru, Chennai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Kolkata, Mumbai and Pune, recorded increase in the index on an annual basis. A stable to moderate increase in HPI also offers confidence to homeowners and home loan beneficiaries in terms of the retained value of the asset. Conclusion. In 2022, both CPI and WPI have fallen below 6% and are on the descending slope of the surge that hit the economy in the first half of the current fiscal. International crude oil prices, the principal drivers of inflation this financial year, have returned to normal levels, and so have prices of other major commodities. RBI projects CPI inflation for quarter 1 of financial year 2024 at 5% and for quarter 2 of financial year 24 at 5.4% on the assumption of a normal monsoon. India's inflation management has been particularly noteworthy and can be contrasted with advanced economies that are still grappling with sticky inflation rates. Due to the anticipated slowdown in advanced economies, inflation risks coming from global commodity prices are likely to be lower in financial year 24 than in 23. RBI forecasts elevated domestic prices for cereals and spices in the near term owing to supply shortages. Milk prices are also expected to spike, reflecting high feed costs. In general, climate across the world has become increasingly erratic, further fortifying upside risks to food prices. Still, overall, the inflation challenge in financial year 24 must be a lot less stiff than it has been this year. RBI expect monetary and fiscal authorities to be as proactive and vigilant as they have been in this year. This is it for today's video. If you have any questions, please write it in the comment section. Please like and share this video and subscribe to IBI India Business Insights.